of Green Gables is a 1908 novel by Canadian author Lucy Maud Montgomery, published as L. M. Montgomery. Written for all ages, it has been considered a classic children's novel since the mid-20th century. Set in the late 19th century, the novel recounts the adventures of Anne Shirley, an 11-year-old orphan girl, who is sent by mistake to two middle-aged siblings, Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert, who had originally intended to adopt a boy to help them on their farm in the fictional town of Avonlea in Prince Edward Island, Canada. The novel recounts how Anne makes her way through life with the Cuthberts, in school, and within the town. Lucy Maud Montgomery Obe, November 30, 1874 to April 24, 1942, published as L. M. Montgomery, was a Canadian author best known for a collection of novels, essays, short stories, and poetry beginning in 1908 with Anne of Green Gables. She published 20 novels as well as 530 short stories, 500 poems, and 30 essays. Anne of Green Gables was an immediate success. The title character, Orphan Anne Shirley, made Montgomery famous in her lifetime and gave her an international following. Most of the novels were set in Prince Edward Island, and those locations within Canada's smallest province became a literary landmark and popular tourist site, namely Green Gables Farm, the genesis of Prince Edward Island National Park. She was made an officer of the Order of the British Empire in 1935. Characters of the novel: Anne Shirley, an imaginative, talkative, red-haired orphan who comes to live with Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert at age 11. Anne is very sensitive and dislikes the color of her hair. Anne's bleak early childhood was spent being shuttled from orphanage to foster homes, caring for younger children. She is excited to finally have a real home at Green Gables. Marilla Cuthbert, Matthew's sister, an austere but fair woman who has the glimmerings of a sense of humor. Her life has been colorless and without joy until the arrival of Anne. She tries to instill discipline in the child but grows to love Anne's vivacity and joy. Matthew Cuthbert, Marilla's brother, a shy, kind man who takes a liking to Anne from the start. The two become fast friends and he is the first person who has ever shown Anne unconditional love. Although Marilla has primary responsibility for rearing Anne, Matthew has no qualms about spoiling her and indulging her with pretty clothes and fancy shoes. Diana Barry, Anne's bosom friend and a kindred spirit. Anne and Diana become best friends from the moment they meet. She is the only girl of Anne's age who lives close to Green Gables. Anne admires Diana for being pretty with black hair and flawless complexion and for her amiable disposition. Diana lacks Anne's vivid imagination but is a loyal friend. Gilbert Blythe, a handsome, smart, and witty classmate, 2 years older than Anne, who has a crush on her. Unaware of Anne's sensitivity about her red hair, he tries to get her attention by holding her braid and calling her carrots in the classroom, and she breaks a slate over his head. Despite his attempts at an apology, Anne's anger and stubbornness prevent her from speaking to him for several years. By the end of the book, however, they reconcile and become good friends. Ruby Gillis, another of Anne's friends. Having several grown-up sisters, Ruby loves to share her knowledge of Beau with her friends. Ruby is beautiful, with long golden hair. Jane Andrews, one of Anne's friends from school. She is plain and sensible. She does well enough academically to join Anne's class at Queen's. Josie Pye, a classmate generally disliked by the other girls, as are her siblings. Josie is vain, dishonest, and jealous of Anne's popularity. Prissy Andrews, another school companion of Anne's, who is assumed to be in a relationship with the teacher, Mr. Phillips. Mrs. Rachel Lynde, a neighbor of Matthew and Marilla. Mrs. Lynde is a noted busybody, but is also industrious and charitable. Although she and Anne start off on the wrong foot due to Mrs. Lynde's blunt criticism and Anne's short temper, they soon become quite close. Mrs. Lynde is married to Thomas Lynde, who is mentioned several times but never appears, and has raised 10 children. Mr. Phillips, Anne's first teacher at Avonlea. Mr. Phillips is unpopular with students. In Anne's case, he continually misspells her name without the E, and punishes only her among 12 pupils who arrive late, resulting in Anne's refusal to attend school for several weeks. Once, he punished Anne for losing her temper with Gilbert Blythe. He is described as lacking discipline, and courts one of his older pupils, Prissy Andrews, openly. Miss Muriel Stacy, Anne's energetic replacement teacher. Her warm and sympathetic nature appeals to her students, but some of Avonlea's more old-fashioned parents disapprove of her teaching methods. Miss Stacy is another, kindred spirit, whom Anne views as a mentor. Miss Stacy encourages Anne to develop her character and intellect and helps prepare her for the entrance exam at Queen's Academy. Mr. and Mrs. Allen, the minister and his wife also befriend Anne, with Mrs. Allen becoming particularly close. She is described as pretty and as a kindred spirit. Mr. and Mrs. Barry, Diana's parents. Mr. Barry is unseen. He is a farmer. Near the end of the book, he offers to rent some tracts to help out Anne and Marilla, after Matthew's death. Mrs. Barry is a strict parent. After Anne accidentally gets Diana drunk, Mrs. Barry forbids Diana to have anything to do with Anne. This sanction is repealed after Anne saves Diana's younger sister, Minnie May. Minnie May Barry, Diana's baby sister, whose life is saved by Anne when she becomes infected with croup. Miss Josephine Barry, Diana's wealthy great-aunt from Charlottetown. She is initially severe, but is quickly charmed and entertained by Anne's imagination, and invites her and Diana to tea. She refers to Anne as the Anne girl, and even sends Anne beaded slippers as a Christmas present. Mrs. Hammond, Anne lives with her for a portion of her pre-Green Gables life and cares for Mrs. Hammond's 3 sets of twins. Anne is sent to the Hopetown Orphan Asylum when Mrs. Hammond is forced to break up her home after her husband's sudden death. Summary. Anne Shirley, a young orphan from the fictional community of Bolingbroke, Nova Scotia based upon the real community of New London, Prince Edward Island, 1617, is sent to live with Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert, unmarried siblings in their 50s and 60s, after a childhood spent in strangers' homes and orphanages. Marilla and Matthew had originally decided to adopt a boy from the orphanage to help Matthew run their farm at Green Gables, which is set in the fictional town of Avonlea based on Cavendish, Prince Edward Island. Through a misunderstanding, the orphanage sends Anne instead. Anne is fanciful, imaginative, eager to please, and dramatic. She is also adamant her name should always be spelt with an E at the end. However, she is defensive about her appearance, despising her red hair, freckles and pale, thin frame, but liking her nose. She is talkative, especially when it comes to describing her fantasies and dreams. At first, stern Marilla says Anne must return to the orphanage, but after much observation and consideration, along with kind, quiet Matthew's encouragement, Marilla decides to let her stay. Anne takes much joy in life and adapts quickly, thriving in the close-knit farming village. Her imagination and talkativeness soon brighten up Green Gables. The book recounts Anne's struggles and joys in settling into Green Gables, the first real home she's ever known, the country school where she quickly excels in her studies, her friendship with Diana Barry, the girl living next door, her best bosom friend, as Anne fondly calls her, her budding literary ambitions, and her rivalry with her classmate Gilbert Blythe, who teases her about her red hair. For that, he earns her instant hatred, although he apologizes several times. As time passes, however, Anne realizes she no longer hates Gilbert, but her pride and stubbornness keep her from speaking to him. The book also follows Anne's adventures in Avonlea. Episodes include playtime with her friends Diana, calm, placid Jane Andrews, and beautiful, boy-crazy Ruby Gillis. She has run-ins with the unpleasant Pye sisters, Gertie and Josie, and frequent domestic scrapes, such as dyeing her hair green while intending to dye it black, and accidentally getting Diana drunk by giving her what she thinks is raspberry cordial but which turns out to be currant wine. At 16, Anne goes to Queen's Academy to earn a teaching license, along with Gilbert, Ruby, Josie, Jane, and several other students, excluding Diana, much to Anne's dismay. She obtains her license in 1 year instead of the usual 2 and wins the Avery Scholarship awarded to the top student in English. This scholarship would allow her to pursue a Bachelor of Arts BA degree at the fictional Redmond College based on the real Dalhousie University, on the mainland in Nova Scotia. Near the end of the book, however, tragedy strikes when Matthew dies of a heart attack after learning that all of his and Marilla's money has been lost in a bank failure. Out of devotion to Marilla and Green Gables, Anne gives up the scholarship to stay at home and help Marilla, whose eyesight is failing. She plans to teach at the Carmody School, the nearest school available, and return to Green Gables on weekends. In an act of friendship, Gilbert Blythe gives up his teaching position at the Avonlea School to work at the White Sands School instead, knowing that Anne wants to stay close to Marilla after Matthew's death. After this kind act, Anne and Gilbert's friendship is cemented, and Anne looks forward to what life will bring next.